Hello, I'm Rachel from Douentza Garden in Ireland, and you are very welcome to the April garden tour. So in this video we're going to take a look around my garden here, which is in North Wexford in Southern Ireland. It's about an acre in size, which is half a hectare, and I garden in what roughly equates to as hardiness zone 9. So if you want to see what's looking good in the garden now and what I've been up to in terms of preparation for the summer ahead, then do stay tuned. You are very welcome to the video, and before we get into it and take an in-detail look at the garden, I just want to say that I always feel with April that spring is truly on its way and the garden finally shakes off the dust of winter and autumn and whatever that has entailed and begins to smile once again. And of course a little bit of sunshine like we have today and have had for I think nearly a week now does amazing things for the morale. It really gets you out there and just kind of sprucing things up and getting things looking their best. And there is such a very lot to be done. But before we get into what I've been up to and what I've been doing in April, I just want to focus for a few minutes on what plants are looking really fantastic at the moment. Now, tulips, of course, they started here last month in March with the Fusteriana ones that looked absolutely wonderful, and I do tend to favour the Emperor series. Beautiful white goblets of flower and orange as well, and I certainly will be investing in more of these beauties as time goes on. But the Fusteriana tulips, they are beginning to go past their best now. But if I were feeling a little bit sad about that, then it didn't last for very long, because the Darwin hybrid tulips, much bigger, meatier things, are really strutting their stuff at the moment. And I have a couple of different types, notably Banja Luka, which is this gorgeous orange one, and I just love its sunny, deep cups. They just brighten up any border. I also have other orange tulips, and as I look around my garden I think to myself, wow, I really do favour orange. And those ones are the Ballerina. Now, Ballerina is a lily flowered tulip type, and it's not a group that is known for repeat flowering, for coming back year on year, but Ballerina is different and I found it extremely reliable in my garden. And you can see behind me in this display here how the orange Ballerina tulip looks fantastic against these wallflowers. Now these are orange wallflowers that I grew from seed last year. Yes, they're biennials, so I planted them out at the end of the season last year, and I've been rewarded with a whole froth of orange scented gorgeousness here in the shape of this amazing plant. I'm really pleased with this display, and I think that going forward I will be growing more wallflowers because they're just wonderful at plugging any gaps and stopping weeds coming up, because the more plants you have, you know, in your borders, the less likelihood there is for weeds to pop up. And if you can plug the gaps earlier on with wallflowers, allow them to flower magnificently, and then when they're finished, just pull them out and give the other plants a chance to kind of oomph up and fill the space, then I think it's going to do a really excellent job of keeping those weeds down, and we all want that. Now, you may think that my favourite thing in spring is the tulips, because I do talk about them a lot, but it's not. What I really love in spring is the little woodland plants. Of course, we have lots of blossom, as you see here before you. This fantastic plant bush called the Bride is wonderful. There are also fabulous things like tree peonies. This gorgeous pink one here has a bumper crop of, oh gosh, 5 or more flowers this year. But the thing that really gets me in spring is the tiny little things that you need to brush away the debris to see. And they start perhaps with the erythroniums, and I'm going to be mentioning several North American woodland plants here because there are some real beauties out there. I absolutely love erythroniums. I have 3 different types in my garden, and the Kinfound's pink is my absolute favorite. I just find it so easy. It seeds about, I've moved them around, and I've got lots and lots of different clumps, which is just wonderful. And such an elegant flower with their nodding heads. So I really look forward to those in spring. But what I look forward to more perhaps is the bloodroot, which the botanic name is Sanguinaria, and I have the double form. And I have a big mass planting of these little beauties here in this border. And when they come into flower, I just think they look so gorgeous. They don't last a terrible long time, but I think that their transience is part of their charm, and it's certainly something that I'm very proud of, having such a big mass planting of them in the garden. Well, I mean, it's not enormous, but it certainly is substantial. And then another plant I do love is the Trillium. Now, I don't have a lot of Trilliums, but the ones I do seem to be doing well, and they are great to look out for in spring. A wonderful plant that also likes dapple shade and produces very elegant flowers. Everything about the plant presents in threes, hence the name Trillium. And then last, but by no means least, I want to talk about the wood anemone. And the wood anemone should not be confused with the Japanese anemone, which is a completely different animal and flowers at the other end of the season in autumn. And these are large plants that produce white flowers and do well in shady spaces, perhaps being a slight bit invasive, but the wood anemone isn't like that at all. Now, the thing about the wood anemone is it produces dainty little flowers that just fill in any shady space under a tree. And in spring, before the leaves come on the trees, these plants get the light they require to flower, and flower magnificently. And I always think it's the sign of a mature garden, one where the gardener is actually doing it for themselves rather than the public, if the garden has little pockets of things like wood anemones, which are going to flower and look good when only the person who planted them is looking out for them and enjoying them. Now, I have 2 cultivars here, both Irish cultivars, and the first one is the blue Robinsoniana, and the second one is a larger flowered one called Lucy's Wood. I don't see a lot of difference between the 2, to tell the truth, but I do love them. And my favourite one is a double, which is called Vestal. Absolutely gorgeous white thing. And of course, in April there is so much to do. Where does it ever end? Sometimes I feel. For me anyway, I'm continuing to cut back perennials. So this is the dead growth, dead top growth from last year. I'm continuing to weed, and I'm continuing to edge the borders. And at this point you can begin to see the garden emerging, and I love that. You get a taste of what's to come and the beauty that's hiding there underneath the debris that winter has brought about. So it's also a great time to move perennials, and I've been moving clumps of my Monarda to other places in the garden where I have spaces. And Monarda is actually quite easy to move because you don't need to dig the whole thing up and slice it. You just kind of cut off a little piece or a larger piece from around the edge of the clump, and it transplants so well. So that's been very handy. I've also been transplanting some Selenum Wallickiana, which is a perennial that kind of seeds around here in the garden. So I have moved some of that, and I'm anticipating frothy masses of white flowers a bit later in the season. And there have also been a few plants edited out. Now, editing out is the polite way of saying get rid of. And there was a tree lupin that had seen better days. So I guess the problem with the tree lupin is that it tends to grow quite soft and it can be broken by the wind. So if you have one and you have any kind of wind on your site, you're going to end up taking bits off it the whole time as they break. And anyway, I just got fed up with it, so out it went, and it left space then for a Stipa gigantea, which I was able to move from somewhere else into that position, which was just perfect. There was also an eryngium that had not been earning its keep for a very long time, and I decided to get rid of it. It was taking up the biggest space, and I'm so pleased that it's gone because it gave me the opportunity to plant a beautiful orange azalea that I had had nowhere for and had bought last year. Now, I really think that this pretty azalea is a much better fit for this space than the large spiky eryngium that just didn't do anything in particular, and I suppose in terms of shape was very similar to the grass, the Quinacroloa rubra just behind it. Now, whenever I mention getting rid of a plant, it seems to annoy some people. Perhaps I should adopt the phrase edit, because whenever a gardener says edit, it means getting rid of or throwing away. And I do feel that, well, I suppose, despite the fact that it's my garden and what I do here is really my own business, very often gardeners will tend to let the tail wag the dog, and they will do their utmost to keep alive plants that are doing badly or just aren't suited to their particular garden. And if you want to do that, that's fine. I mean, do that. Who am I to tell you what you can or can't grow? But it is important, I think, to assess what is working in your garden, and if you want your garden to look good, then you need to constantly reevaluate how things are looking, and if it comes to a tough decision and editing a certain plant out, then get rid of it. You've probably noticed that the Stipa gigantea, which are these humps over here, have been cut back, and that was done in April. Now, I did make a video a while ago talking about how to do this, because the general recommendation is that this grass should not be cut back. It should be just kind of plucked, but I've always found it works so much better if you cut it back. And I did mention that this should be done in February, but you know, I think anytime really, February, March, April seems okay. And really, you know, we have a lot going on in our busy lives. Sometimes we don't get round to things. And for me anyway, it's certainly worth doing. It just gives that sense of freshness to the garden. And then you get all that fresh new growth coming out of your Stipa, which is always wonderful. Speaking of cutting back, this year I had to cut back my Melianthus major. Now, this is a beautiful bush with glaucous foliage, and last year it was particularly mild winter. I didn't cut it back at all, but this year there's no question about it. There's nothing to be saved. Luckily, you can see that the new shoots are coming from the base, and this is a plant that regenerates very easily and very reliably for me. Now you probably noticed my buxus hedge and my box balls back there, and you'll recall how in the February garden tour I mentioned I had box blight. It's since been treated, so now it's just a waiting game to see how these will respond to the treatment, and hopefully I'll have lush green growth before very long. One other little thing I want to mention to you is an experiment I'm doing on dry shade. Now, it's easy to grow plants in moist shade. Moist shade is welcoming to a variety of beautiful, beautiful plants, but dry shade is difficult. And there's nothing worse than the dry shade under a conifer tree, like this one here. The problem is further compounded by the fact that this conifer drops needles, making the earth particularly acidic. This spring I'm doing an experiment because I do have 2 plants in the garden which I feel might do well in the dry shade. Up until now, the only thing that's grown in here is a native viola that just decided this was its spot, and I welcome it, and also the crocus thomasinianum, which has surprisingly done well. But this spring I'm going to experiment with 2 other plants, namely a saxifrage, so Saxifrage stolonifera, and this saxifrage is a bit unusual because it's one that likes shade. It also has the distinction that it is grown often as a house plant, and there are very few plants that deserve that accolade. Very few plants that here in Ireland we can grow successfully as house plants, but also have as hardy outdoor plants in the garden. However, Saxifrage stolonifera is one such plant, and I've grown it outdoors in shady, dry conditions for a very long time. I do think it's going to do well under this conifer tree, but only time will tell. And the second plant that I'm going to try here is a Liriop muscari, which might do well. Now this flowers at the other end of the season, so the Saxifrage flowers in June and the Liriop is an autumn flowerer. So I do hope that between the 2 of them I'm going to find something that is suited to this particular position. They are also plants that are quite vigorous and easy to bulk up in my garden, which is important because I have a big space under this tree, and you know, if I find something that works, I don't want to have to spend a fortune to buy lots and lots of that plant. And I've been doing a little bit in the greenhouse as well. So working with those annuals I sowed earlier, and I did mention I had sown 3 trays of annuals. Well, I cheated a little bit because one of those trays was populated with 5 seeds in each cell. And when they all germinated, it was the ideal moment to just prick them out. Not a proper pricking out because the delicate stems were too delicate to be touched, but I just got a little teaspoon and lifted out the root ball and then popped them into another tray. So where I had 1 tray before, I now have 3 or 3.5, so that's really good. And you know what? You can never have too many marigolds. Another thing I did in the greenhouse was to pot on the lilies I generated from the scaling method. And this was probably well overdue because those poor lilies were bursting out of the tray I had them in. Now, as you'll recall, I propagated 2 types, Lilium speciosum, which was in my own garden, a lovely pink lily that has done so well for me over the years. And I also propagated the dark flowered Asiatic type lily called Night Rider, and the Night Rider has proved much more vigorous than the speciosum, but they're both doing well, and before long I hope to be able to plant those out in the garden. And speaking of planting out, the Sweet Williams which I grew as part of the large sowing of biennials last year. Those also got planted out in the garden, and yeah, I'm very much looking forward to seeing those flowers. So I hope you've enjoyed looking around the garden with me on this beautiful April day. I hope your garden is giving you as much joy as mine is to me, and that you're getting on top of those jobs. And I hope that you're doing the nice jobs, not just the annoying ones that we all have to get around to and do even though we don't want to. I hope you can find time to do the nice jobs. And I would consider among those nice jobs as photographing your plants, a little bit of deadheading, and even just sitting there with a glazed expression as you gaze lovingly into the face of a wonderful double bloodroot. I certainly do it, and it is definitely the best job in town. Thank you as always for watching. I hope you'll check back soon. I hope to have a busy schedule going forward, and if the weather stays like this, hopefully lots and lots of outdoor stuff in the garden. Thanks as always for watching. Bye.